So yeah, my presentation's next 20 minutes is maybe a little bit aside to the rest of the evening, where so you're going to hear from fund managers, and as Kevin sort of already mentioned about, building your portfolio, making it efficient. What I'm talking about here is hopefully you've all done it really efficiently, and hopefully it's all a very long time off for all of us, but eventually, obviously, we are all going to pass away, and hopefully you might have some funds left over, which might then be able to go on and benefit your family. And so I'm just going to have a little look around the pension rules. I'm not an investments person, I'm a pensions technical person. So I'm going to look a little bit about that, what you can do, and sort of about tax efficiency and sort of what your options are with your pension for when you want to pass it on. So I don't need to cover that slide because Roland's done all the warnings at the start. So I'm going to look at, first of all, what happens to your pension when you die. Who can benefit from your pension now when you pass away? What can be paid? What form of benefits? What can they do with it? The tax treatment for your beneficiaries. We'll have a look at the charity option, if any of you want to leave any of your pension fund to charity, how that works. The lifetime allowance test, that's not going to affect everybody, but it will be relevant for people who have particularly large pension funds. And then the last little point will be on tax-efficient nominations that you may wish to consider. So, first of all, what happens to your pension when you die? Well, first thing, obviously, as a pension provider, somebody in your family will notify us of your passing, and at that point, effectively, your pension will be frozen. If you were taking any income payments, they would stop. But the investments are still held in there, and you can still get the returns. It can still be building up in there, but till someone takes it over, effectively you can't be trading on it. We then, as the scheme administrator of the pension scheme, have to use our discretion to decide who is going to benefit from your pension. Now, we quite often get asked, well, can't I just say I want it to go to this person and you follow my wishes? And in most cases, in practice, that is what happens. But we have to be able to use our discretion, or the benefit of us being able to use our discretion is the fact that it keeps your pension fund outside your estate. If we had set up our pension in such a way that your nomination was binding on us, it would form part of your estate on your death. Whereas now, in most circumstances, your SIP, when you pass away, it's not going to be part of your estate. So it doesn't matter if you've got IHT issues elsewhere, this isn't going to be part of it or form any further issues for you in most circumstances. So we then, I say, have to use our discretion, but how do we do that? How do we know who to pay the benefits to? Well, first and foremost, we have our death benefits and expression wish form. So you tell us who you want to leave your funds to. And that's going to be the biggest thing that we go by. But there are some circumstances when it's not just that. So you will have, when you've set up a scheme with us, you will have been asked in the application stage to put on who you want your pension benefits to go to. Some of you might not have looked at it for a really, really long time, and your circumstances might have changed. It's not always something at the forefront of your mind, but I will stress it now, and I'll probably stress it again in a few minutes, how important it is to keep your nominations up to date. Really, really key. Also, hot off the press news, these paper forms, you don't have to use them anymore. We have now, this week, it has gone live that you can update your nominations online. You can just log into your account, into your details, and you can go in there and change it. So it's an easy thing to do. So please, if you haven't updated it for a while, go and do that. So we will look at whatever we've got down as the expression of wish when somebody passes away, when we're making our decision. We will look and see if your circumstances have changed since you've made it. So have you got married or have you got divorced are the most obvious ones we will look at. Has the person you've nominated passed away already? We will also look at your will. Now, it doesn't mean to say that what happens to your pension scheme has to mirror what's in your will, but we do have to take it, well, we do normally take it into account. So, for example, you've decided to leave your pension fund 50-50 to your 2 children, but you have a surviving spouse. Now, we have to consider a surviving spouse as a dependent when we're making a decision as to who should get the pension benefits. It might be that you've got £200,000 in your pension, so your 2 kids are going to get £100,000 each on your death, but you've also got other assets of £500,000 somewhere else, and you've left that to your wife. And so actually, your spouse is cared for and is looked after and doesn't need it. It's just that's how you've chosen to do it. That's absolutely fine. But in terms of us exercising our discretion, it's useful for us to see that, to have that information, so we don't just think you've just cut them out. So we do have to look at the bigger picture and exercise discretion. So really, the more information you can give us, you know, if you put something in the will to say, right, I believe in this, I've made separate provision for my children in my pension, or refer to it, or, you know, you can send us an email or a sort of a side letter, something just explaining your decision. That means when we're exercising our discretion, it can make the process an awful lot simpler for us. And it's going to be easier for the people that you leave behind, because if we know this and we don't have to keep asking them lots of questions and determining this information, and the more up to date the information that you give us as well, that can make the whole process a lot easier. So who can you leave your pension to then? So this is here as the member here. Most obviously, you know, most people first and foremost will leave it to their spouse, but you could also leave it to somebody that's determined as a nominee, which would be an adult child that isn't dependent on you. You could nominate them. But you can actually nominate, you know, your best buddy from down the pub if you want. Whoever you like. There's actually no limit now. Doesn't have to be restricted to family members. If you want to leave your pension to somebody else, then you can do. That's absolutely fine. The other thing, the way that pension death benefits work now, is that if your beneficiaries, whether they're a dependent or a nominee, your beneficiaries decide to keep it in a pension fund, and then when they pass away, there's still some funds left, which is originated from your funds, they can pass it on again. And that then becomes what's known as a successor's pension. So you can pass it on more than once. It can carry on down generations, or until the government change the rules. But anyway. But of course, you as well, you don't have to go to your direct descendants. You can pass funds directly on to grandchildren if you wanted to. Even though this is a dependent, legally dependent, because it's a child, it's not your dependent, they would still be classed as a nominee, but you can leave funds. And there are tax reasons, which I'll come on to, why you might want to leave funds to children as well, or part of your fund to children. We have 3 different types of beneficiaries. I've covered that: dependent, nominee, successor. The important difference really is just that a dependent, when we're making our decision as to who can receive your pension benefits, we always have to consider a dependent. So even if you've not on your expression of wish form put a dependent on there, we have a duty legally that we have to consider them when making our decision. So we would need to know really that a dependent had been looked after elsewhere if you weren't leaving anything to a dependent. Whereas that's not the case for a nominee. A nominee is that's who you've nominated, so you've told us directly. And then if you didn't have any dependents, we'd look at who else was appropriate. But we don't have to consider other nominees unless it's somebody that you've named. So to be a dependent, it's basically a spouse or civil partner, child under 23. Some of you may well have children in their mid-20s who feel very much dependent on you, but technically speaking, bank of mum and dad, whatever, they're not for these purposes. I say if they've got any physical, mental impairments, if they're older, then that would qualify. But anybody that's financially dependent on you or in a financial relationship of mutual dependence. So if you're cohabiting with somebody, if you've got a joint mortgage, if you live together, if you've got a joint bank account, things like that, it's likely to make them a dependent even if you're not married. For these purposes. So nominee is just anybody that you've named, and successor is after either a dependent or a nominee has passed away. It's like the next generation of it. But what can be paid out? What then can they receive? So you've got your pension fund. We've decided as the scheme administrator who's the appropriate person for these to receive your benefits. What can they do with it? So any individual person that's a nominee or a dependent can choose to take the whole fund out as a lump sum if they want, or they can move it to a pension in their own name. So they can keep it within the tax advantages of a pension wrapper, and then they can just draw an income whenever they want at a later date. And it's not like your pension where you have to wait till you're age 55 before you can access it. Even if your dependent or your beneficiary is only 20 years old, they can still access the pension. If they're 10 years old, they can access the pension. So by that I mean that children, you can have SIPs for minors. They would have to be looked after by the parent or legal guardian over the age of 18 who would manage the funds, manage the portfolio. They would look after the withdrawals, but they are taxed as if it was the child's. So if you had grandchildren, for example, who were being privately educated, you could withdraw funds as long as it's for the benefit of the child who's the beneficiary. You could use it for things like paying school fees. And then when they get to 18, they would then take over it in their own right, and it'd be a pension in their own right. But because it's a beneficiary's pension, they can access it whenever they want that fund. They don't have to wait until they're 55. If your beneficiary has a SIP of their own already, then you can have a beneficiary's pension fund and your own pension fund all together in one SIP. They're just kept in separate arrangements, but it's only, one pension scheme still. You can also have a combination of the two. So once we've decided, say, the individual who's going to receive these benefits, they can have some of it as a lump sum. They can take out now, and some of it they can leave in the pension. They can decide. Important thing is, though, it is the beneficiary that decides that, not you. So you might say, OK, I want to leave some of my pension fund to my child or grandchild. You can't say, I only want them to have access to income on it. I don't want them taking it all out in one go and blowing it. You can't have that level of control. Once it's in their name, they can do what they like with it. I say the only caveat in that, I say if you've got a child under 18, then it'll be the parent or legal guardian until they hit 18. But as soon as they hit 18, they could take it all out. You can have multiple beneficiaries. So, you can put like 80% to a spouse if you want, and 10% each to your children, something like that. You can split it however you like. Lump sums as well can also be paid to trusts and charities. So if you are concerned about, you want to leave some funds to somebody, whether it's actually a minor or somebody in their early 20s, but you're concerned about them all blowing it in one go, you might want to consider a trust. Haven't got time to explain all the details of that today, but that could give you more control. You can also pay lump sums to charity. You can't pay income to a trust or income to a charity. It would have to come out of the pension fund and be paid as a lump sum, but they are available. So beneficiaries then who choose to take drawdown, so they keep it within a pension fund, keep the tax wrapper, they just access it whenever they want. I say, I've already covered this, you can take income, it's separate. Another point is if you are the recipient as a beneficiary of somebody else's pension, taking an income from that pot doesn't affect your ability to save in your own pension. As I'm sure some of you will be aware, you start taking your pension benefits now, it can impact, you can't save as much into a pension scheme anymore. If you're taking income as a beneficiary, that doesn't affect what you can do with your own pension. So moving on to how it's all taxed then. So basic principle on this is if you die before the age of 75, the good news is your beneficiaries get it tax-free. Obviously the bad news is you've died before 75, which we hope doesn't happen, but yes. In most circumstances, there is a bit of a caveat on there that the distribution, so the decision as to who's going to get the pension benefits, has to be made within 2 years of when the scheme administrator knows about your death. So we have 2 years either to pay it out as a lump sum or 2 years where we put it into a pension in the beneficiary's name. As long as we do that within 2 years, whenever they take their income payments from that fund, even if it's 20 years later, that's going to be tax-free. So they can keep it and save it in there and just take it out when they need it. The only little asterisk, because there's always caveats with pension rules, is up to the lifetime allowance, which I will talk a little bit about that in a moment. If you live to over 75, which obviously hopefully we all will, then you do have, your beneficiaries will have tax to pay. If they keep it in the pension wrapper and just take it out as an income, it'll just be added to their other income for income tax purposes. So it'll be whatever their marginal rate is that they will pay on that. If it's paid to a trust after the age of 75, then you do have a 45% tax charge on it going into the trust. Now, there are certain ways you get a tax credit for the beneficiary when they then at a later date take the money out of that trust, but it's maybe not quite as tax efficient. It's not as tax efficient as keeping it in the pension, but you do have control, so it's a bit of a one that needs a bit more consideration. There's no lifetime allowance test if you die after the age of 75 because you'll have already had one in your lifetime. I'm going to touch on the charity lump sum option. So, a few rules about whether something can be a charity lump sum or not. First of all, we can only pay it in this way, which is a specified way of paying death benefits under HMRC rules. First of all, you can only do it if you don't have any dependents. The view is the HMRC wants to make sure your dependents are looked after first and foremost, and you can only do the charity option after that. But if you're the second one to go and there's no other dependents, then you may want to consider it. So if you've got no dependents, it has to be a charity nominated by you as the member. So that means if you pass away and your family, maybe you don't have any dependents, but your children or whoever say, actually, we don't need the money, we'd like it to go to a charity, they can't nominate the charity, we can't nominate it as scheme administrator, it has to be one that you have nominated yourself in your lifetime. It's not subject to the lifetime allowance test, and it's paid tax-free. So, but if you die before age 75, as long as it's within the 2 years and you've got enough lifetime allowance, then it's paid tax-free anyway, so you don't really need to adhere to these rules, you can still do it. The big one, though, is if you die over 75, then it does give you the ability to pay it out tax-free, whereas otherwise it would be 45% tax. Just going to quickly cover the lifetime allowance test. It won't affect everybody, but there's a test. The lifetime allowance is a limit on the total amount of pension savings you can have across all pension schemes, and when you access benefits, it's tested against it. Goes up every year in line with CPI inflation, but it's £1,055,000 currently for this year. There's only certain circumstances, so it only gets tested on your death if you die before age 75 and you haven't accessed all your funds. And they are paid out to somebody within the 2 years. There's only certain circumstances where it gets tested. It's your allowance, so it doesn't matter about your beneficiaries, how much pension savings they have. Your personal representatives are responsible for this test. So whoever's dealing with your estate will have to sort it out. The tax is payable by the beneficiaries, but of course they've got your pension fund. They can use that to pay the tax out of it if there was one. I say it's only if you've got a pension fund in excess of the lifetime allowance. If you need to worry about that one. And say it doesn't apply to the charity lump sums. Final couple of slides on this. So, just something to consider. Now, obviously, it'll depend on your circumstances, whether this is appropriate for you or not, about making tax-efficient nominations. If it is something of your concern that you want to be able to pass on your funds, you have sufficient funds to leave to family and you want to pass them on in the most efficient way. Case study I have here is Tony, who's 85, who has passed away. Now, his wife has predeceased him and he has one son. So it might seem like the most obvious thing to most people to leave your pension fund 100% to your only child in those circumstances. But his only child is a higher rate taxpayer. Now, because Tony's over the age of 85, John decides to leave it in a pension, but whenever he draws income out of that pension fund, it's going to be added to his income. So he's going to be paying 40% tax on it, at least, when he takes that out. However, John has got 2 children of his own who are both students at university and, frankly, costing John an absolute fortune in tuition fees and living costs and whatever else. Now, obviously, John's got this money now. He could use this to pay those fees, but if he takes any money out of that fund, it's 40% tax. What might have been more efficient is if Tony had left some funds directly to his grandchildren. Because if he's paid it directly to them, maybe not all of it, a portion of it, put that in a pension fund in their own name, when they take it out, it's subject to income tax because he died over 85. They're students, they don't have any other income. And they do have a personal allowance of £12,500 a year. So they can take out £12,500 completely tax-free, whereas if it's gone via dad, he's paying 40%. If they want to take out more than £12,500, they're only going to be a basic rate taxpayer, obviously up to the band, up to 50,000. So obviously these sort of circumstances are going to change as people grow up and get jobs and start working and things like that, but it could be worth considering if you're updating your nominations, if that's the sort of scenario, if you want it, pass it on if that's important. There are more tax efficient ways of doing things. So just to finish off a summary here, you can nominate whoever you like to receive your pension now, your pension death benefits. The rules changed just over 4 years ago. They are very, very flexible now. So really, you can nominate whoever you want, adult, child, trust or charity. Beneficiaries get to choose how they take their benefits. That's not anything that you have control of, say, unless you wanted to consider using a trust. Really important to keep your nomination up to date. It makes things an awful lot easier when we spend a lot of time dealing with death benefits and trying to work out to use our discretion if people's circumstances have changed. Even if your circumstances haven't changed, if we've got an expression of wish form that tells us what you want to do, but it's 10 years old, we have to think about what's happened in the last 10 years, whereas if you've done it 10 months ago, we don't have to look back and we know that's up to date and that's current with your wishes. So please, and I say it's easy to do it now, you can go online and do it, and if it's appropriate, you might want to consider non-taxpayers as beneficiaries. But that's all for me. It's telling me my time is up, so I shall hand you back to Roland. Thank you.